So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Victoria Memorial Hall for a very special lecture by a very special person. We have Catherine David with us. She is, as you can see, the Chief Curator and Deputy Director of the National Museum of Modern Art, Centre Georges Pompidou de Paris. Oui. And she is going to talk on the subject of I was almost going to say rethinking the future of India. No, rethinking the future of the museums of modern art. Yeah, I know, but then I suddenly remembered that the model code of conduct has rung in already, so I shouldn't be talking about that. So, rethinking the future of the museums of modern art. So, before Madame David makes her presentation, may I request Dr. Joyendra Sengupta to welcome the audience here, please.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's event in which it is our privilege and honor to have with us the very eminent French art historian and curator, Madame Catherine David, of the famed Pompidou Center in Paris, to speak on rethinking the future of museums of modern art, which is a subject that concerns all of us in museums and art galleries of this world. Catherine has seen from up close the diverse histories of the development of the venerated institution of the Museum of Modern Art, not only in the Euro-American world, but all over the world, including India. And the future, or maybe futures, that she will be talking about tonight will draw on this diverse experience. As all of you know, Catherine David is the Chief Curator and Deputy Director of the famed National Museum of Modern Art in the iconic Centre Georges Pompidou in Paris, where she has also been the Head of Research and Globalization Department since 2014. From 1982 to 1990, she was Curator at the National Museum of Modern Art, and from 1990 to 1994, at the Galerie Nationale du Jeu du Paume in Paris, which is a premier arts center for modern and postmodern photography and media. From 1994 to 1997, she served as artistic director for Documenta 10, that is the 10th edition of one of the world's foremost contemporary art exhibitions that takes place once every 5 years. In the 1997 edition in Kassel, Germany, Catherine David became the first woman ever to be appointed as the artistic director of Documenta. Since 1998, she has been director of the long-term project Contemporary Arab Representations, which began at the Antoni Tapies Foundation in Barcelona, Spain. Between 2002 and 2004, she was director of the Witte Center of Contemporary Art in Rotterdam, in the Netherlands. Among the long line of premier exhibitions she has curated in her long and distinguished career, I will mention just a few. The ADAC, Platform for Visual Arts, at the 53rd Venice Arts Biennale in 2011. The retrospective on Hassan Sharif, titled Experiments and Objects 1979 to 2011, presented as the Qasr Al-Hosn in Abu Dhabi in 2011. Marwan, Early Works 1962 to 1972 at the Beirut Exhibition Center in Beirut in 2013, and also at the Serralves Foundation in Porto, Portugal in 2014. Unedited History, Iran 1960 to 2014 at the City of Paris Museum of Modern Art, and at Maxi in Rome, which is Italy's National Museum of Contemporary Art and Architecture, and with which we are planning an exhibition of photography sometime later this year. She did both of these versions of Unedited History, Iran 1960 to 2014, in 2014 itself. Dia al-Azai, a retrospective from 1963 until tomorrow, beautifully named, at Qatar's iconic exhibition spaces Mathaf and Al Riyak in Doha in 2017. As Deputy Director of the Pompidou Centre's National Museum of Modern Art, Catherine David recently curated several projects, among which special mention may be made of Wilfredo Lam in 2015, Memories from the Future's Indian Modernities, done in 2017, and Latif Mahideen, Pago Pago, 1960 to 1969, in 2018, featuring the work of the modernist Malaysian painter Latif Mahideen, who, thanks to Catherine David, became the first Southeast Asian artist to be featured at the Pompidou Center. So it's very evident from Catherine David's work how she has charted out completely new directions for the National Museum of Modern Art and engaged with modernities in all of its global variants. And this, we are sure, will come up in her talk tonight as well. So that's all I have to say for now. I look forward with all of you to a riveting talk. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Catherine David to speak on rethinking the future of museums of modern art. Please. Yes.
Before Catherine David takes the microphone, may I request Jayanta Sengupta to hand over a small memento on behalf of Victoria Memorial Hall to the speaker of the evening. At this juncture, I would also, on behalf of the Victoria Memorial Hall, express our thanks and gratitude to Reena Lath and Abhijit Lath of Akar Prakar, who have facilitated the materialization of this evening's program by acting as a bridge between us and Catherine David. Thank you very much, Reena and Abhijit. Yeah, please raise your hands. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Before we rethink about the future of the museums of modern art, we have some other rethinking to do. Please rethink whether you have switched off your mobile phones or put them on silent mode. Yeah, and if you have, please. You lead by example always, Jayanto, and I hope the others follow and emulate. So with that, I hand over the microphone to Madame Catherine David.
For many artists working or who worked in many different geocultural zones of the world. So these days, you have a kind of a double-faced phenomenon. The supposed to be global, universal museums of modern art are not as universal as they said, or some keep saying. And second, it's impossible to build a decent, comprehensive, coherent narrative for all the world. And what you see often, and I think this is for me very questionable, are collections I call tutti frutti, meaning one of each. And my point is that it's the worst to have one of each, because even a major seminal artist is never all in one work, and it's really ending in misrepresentations. I could take an example. Recently, we were offered a major work. I mean, I thought better ones, but let's say still a major work by Bahman Moasses, the very seminal Iranian artist began to work in the early 50s, and it's a Minotaur. And the Minotaur by Bahman Moasses, when you look carefully, he has no hands, no feet. He's a kind of a handicapped Minotaur. This is really related to the very dark imagination of Moasses, his very early preoccupation with the degradation of the living conditions, not only political and social, but also the climate, very early in the Iran from the 50s. But my point was, if you have just this work, and I'm afraid that even buying this work would have been difficult, and I'm afraid it would be the only one we would be able to have forever, this Minotaur in the collection of the National Museum of Modern Art in Paris, where you already have so many Minotaurs by Picasso, by Matisse, by Masson, and so on and so forth, it would, no, Matisse, yes, Masson, it would be completely swallowed, completely, in a way, interpreted through other dominant representations. So these days, it seems to me that, again, you have to reconsider what supposed to be museums international museums or global museums where, if you're a little bit honest and serious, you see you can't show all the world. How do you do? Maybe it's feasible with contemporary art. I think it's not easy, but let's say with the contemporary, there is something of let's say, simultaneity. The artists are working under the same moment. Even so, we all know that the way you will identify, evaluate, interpret a living artist is not the same if you know what happened before. And it seems to me that when you don't have this knowledge of what happened before, you might be trapped into a very superficial reading, and you can also be tricked by certain kind of artists who are auto-exoticizing and so on and so forth. So this is, I'm not saying it's easy, but you can do, you can work, you can think, you can articulate. When it comes to dead artists, when it comes to the modern, again, it's absolutely impossible to build consistent, meaningful, universal or global collection. And of course, seeing that today is very interesting in a moment when major geocultural, which are continental countries, and you have other ones, but the two continental countries, when you say that, you always think about China and India. It's very interesting in a moment when both China and India, for very different reasons and departing from very different situations, have to think about the narrative of the modern. And it's I don't think it's an insult to say that neither in China nor in India you have a museum of modern art which is really able to deal with the complexity of the modern moment. And I think that this kind of parallel situation, that the museum is supposed to be universal, supposed to be open earlier in time and so on and so forth, are in a way unable to be representative of the all modern histories. It's very interesting to think about how you can manage when you have to you can say, okay, we don't interact, we don't care, they do whatever they want and we do what we have to do. But it seems to me a little bit not only selfish, but a little bit short-minded, because you want to really solve the question. And the one, I'm not saying that there is one solution, but there are ways. And one way could be to pay more and more attention to the trans-regional, trans-local aspects of modernity, so that modernity is much less like a compact history with interiorities, exteriorities, but much more a very complex mapping of interferences, exchanges. When you would take the case of India, it's absolutely clear that India is a continent, but it's not at all autistic. And you see, so I won't speak about the very early times because it's not my field of competence and I don't want to see stupid things. But when I would restrict myself to the modern time, the first question would be, and I know that it's a very important question for my friend Gita Kapoor and many other Indian art historians, when did modern begin? And it seems to me that when you want to answer the question seriously, you have to begin making a difference between modern and modernism, modernity and modernism. I'm afraid that modernity is a massive global phenomenon which came all over, of course, not with the same intensity, not with the same consequences in all the parts of the world affected by modernity, when modernism is has more to do with the project, with what people wanted, what they dreamed about, what they tried to articulate, what succeeded or not, what succeeded partially. And when you are considering these different dynamics of the modern moment, you can come to a point, and it's something I read in the PhD of a good friend of mine working on Iraqi architecture, modern Iraqi architecture. He wrote about modernism without modernity. And I think he picked something absolutely crucial, that you had a very tough modern century for Iraq. Other countries too, but Iraq was well served, I have to say. Very, very a terrible modern moment in the 20th century. But at the same time, you had a very dynamic, very strong modernist impulse from the late 20s on, which ended with a few architectural projects, which of course after stopped because you have to keep things alive and you have to keep minimum dialogue in the society. And when everything is frozen, this is the end. And it's absolutely clear to me and to any honest person that after beginning of the 70s, there is no more very interesting architecture in Iraq, maybe till 75, but after it's gone. So I think that in India, it's quite interesting to see that these days, for reasons which have a lot to do with kind of market strategies or ideological strategy, 47. But 47 is absolutely not the beginning of the modern in Indian culture and art. You know, after you can discuss, but I would go back till what I would, and I'm not saying that because I'm with you tonight, because I said similar things in Delhi last month. The modern would begin with the invention of Calcutta. When I'm saying the invention, I'm referring to the moment when the British understood that the empire couldn't work anymore from London, because London was already a little bit old-fashioned, a little bit unfitting as an engine, as able to really function in order to keep the empire going on and functioning. And it's very interesting because when it would have been French, we would have been more thinking in terms of outre-mer, far. The British, the empire is here and here. The center has to be where it fits. The center has to be where things will function the best. So you could say when I'm saying the invention, I'm referring to all these texts and analyses which are really documenting the idea how the city was conceived and what people thought about, why it should be functioning better than London, what should be organized in a more efficient way in Calcutta than it were in London. So this is a first, you could say, moment. It's also, and after it would be like a long discussion with historians of economy, and it's also corresponding to a moment which is affecting Great Britain, which is affecting Europe in a very, very hard way, the first very heavy industrialization. So it's quite interesting to see that it's not them and us. It's a part of a wider problem. When you want to stay more with what is visual arts and culture, when you think about culture, literature, and painting, and so on and so forth, you would, of course, relate more to the Bengal Revolution, before Shantiniketan, meaning a very special moment when you see, and it's not so often, and it's not all over the world, where you see at the same moment the three things happening together and very porous, the one to the other: the emancipatory project, the spiritual project, and the aesthetical or formal project. So meaning after you can see, depending on the people you are referring to, it can be more emancipatory, this one, more spiritual, but you know, you have always the three aspects of modern project, because I think in India, this is something you could discuss, especially with French people, but when you are here, it's very difficult to think that the spiritual project is not modern. It's also a modern project. So all together, the emancipatory, the spiritual, and the aesthetical and formal. You have all of it. When you think about Kusmadawani, when you think about Vivekananda, when you think about Tagore, and Tagore you have to precise because you had so many Tagore and so talented, such a great family. So you say Rabindranath, who was absolutely, there was a spiritual dimension in his work and in his project. So when you come to this point, you can't deny that this is the first Bengal moment is modern. I know that you have many different ideas and opinions in India. I heard many critical judgments on the Bengal school, and I will simplify. So when you simplify, you have to say, but as something a little bit like a good deal, a good combination between the colonial project and certain kind of system of representation and the more local issue, the opening to Asian project, and so on and so forth. I think the reality is much more complex than that. And between a few positive views on the Bengal school, and especially the work by Abanindranath Tagore, I think one relatively recent, a few years ago, book by Debashish Banerjee, Abanindranath Tagore, The Alternate Nation, is really, I think, very convincingly showing the formal, political, social, ethical dimension of course, first, the work by Abanindranath Tagore, but also the work of the Bengal school. So, you know, when you would work in a museum, it's absolutely important to have very different moments and episodes articulated in such a way that the modern moment is here. And we had discussions because many things I'm saying tonight are also coming from reading, but also meeting and discussing and arguing a lot with many friends and colleagues. And it's absolutely clear to me that this modern moment is much earlier than 47. In 47, if you wanted to stick to the 40s, you could